In this presentation, we will take a look at W-2 income. The W-2 is the most common data input form that we will be receiving when doing tax preparation. However, it's often one of the most complex types of forms, so let's do some analysis of what a W-2 form looks like and what is included within it. Clearly, when we are entering the W-2 form, we're still up here up top in our tax formula, our tax equation on the basically income statement side of the tax return on the income line or the revenue line of it. Here is an example of a W-2 form. You can get an example of the W-2 form on the IRS website at irs.gov. Just take a look and look up the W-2 form, and you can also get instructions related to the W-2 form. Note that you may have many W-2 forms from employers that have a different look and feel to it. May not look exactly like this, fit on the same page as this does, but should have the same information to it. Therefore, in that way, they'll all be standardized. The look and feel might not be standardized or won't be standardized. However, the information in it will be standardized. Therefore, if you only have like the first page of the W-2 and you want to look at instructions for it, you can go to the IRS website at irs.gov, look up the instructions for the W-2 form, and then you will have the line item like box 1, box 2, box 3, and so on and so forth, no matter what the look and feel of the W-2 form is, and can use those instructions to ask questions about it. Oftentimes, you might have questions down here on the boxes like 12A, 12B, and so on and so forth. And therefore, you can go to the IRS website and look at the instructions. The instructions will usually be on the back of the W-2 form, but for whatever reason, if you only have the face for it, they should be standardized, and you can then go to the IRS website and look at it with more detail. So let's just go through this line by line and see what will be included. A will have the employee's social security number. So note that's going to be one of the key kind of documents or key numbers that you're going to need just to create the tax return. So if you're making a new tax return for a client, for example, you will have most of the information on the W-2 form, including the social security number, name, and address, typically. So, and then what you're going to need is something like the date of birth and whatnot for the general kind of information that you'll need to start a new client on the tax return. So you got most of that information on the W-2. So we've got the employee's social security number. That's going to be our taxpayer, or us, of course. We have the employer identification number, or EIN. This is the person who is paying. That's going to be the employer of the individual that we are dealing with. Employer's name, address, and zip code. So we may have to put this into the data input field as well. We have the control number, and then we have the employee's name and initial last name. This is going to be the information we'll typically need to basically start off the tax return as well. So we have the name, we have the social security number, and we have the address, which is the employee's address and zip down here. Now let's look at the actual numbers. So if we look at box 1, we've got the wages, tips, and other compensation. So this is going to be the compensation. Now you can think of box 1 as basically the compensation for federal income taxes. So box 1, 3, and 5 is the first place they can get a little bit confusing because they're all in essence income lines. Now box 1 is basically the income line that is related to the federal income tax return typically. So you could say box 1 is kind of like the federal income tax wages. Box 3 are going to be the wages related to Social Security, and box 5 is going to be the wages related to the Medicare. So how do you read this thing? You're going to say, when you're thinking about entering this into the tax return, you can say, what's going to be taxed for the federal income taxes, which is what we're considering here. Well, that's typically going to be box 1. That's going to be what's going to be included in line 1 of our equation for federal income tax, as this equation is for federal income tax. Then we have the Social Security and Medicare, and there are a couple questions you can ask here. Well, one, why do I need those when I'm doing a federal income tax return? I'm not doing a Social Security tax return or a Medicare tax return. And 2, why would I have a different wage number in box 3 and 5? And 3, you could ask, well, what would be the actual wage? If I was to tell, if someone was asking me how much did I actually earn, which box should I use to know which one we should be earning? So note that the Social Security and Medicare are not basically the federal income tax that we're basically reporting here, and typically the payment for them has already been paid. So we're kind of using the federal income tax return most of the time as a double verification of the Social Security and Medicare, which has already been paid because the employer is required to take it out of the employee's pay. So we're basically just double checking that by reporting it here. We're going to report that information. And for the most part, it's not going to be used for the calculation typically of the federal income tax. It's just going to be information type of form. Hopefully the Social Security and the amount of tax related to it lines up, and it's going to be just basically a verification or reporting type of thing. Now, there could be instances where that's not the case, and we might have to deal with basically a problem with the amount of the Social Security that was reported. That could take place if, for example, you have multiple W-2s. But that's the general rule. It's going to be a basically verification type of process. It shouldn't, and if there's no problem with it, which there typically shouldn't be because it's basically closer to a simplified flat tax, then it's not going to be something that's going to have a big impact on the actual tax we're calculating, which is the federal income tax. And then the question is, well, why would these three boxes be different? And that's because you'll recall that there's some things that we might be able to include in the income line here that are not included in the income line here, which are wages. And so those are things that are in box one where possibly we don't have to include them. Something like a 401k plan, for example, might be something that we basically got. We got money. We got to put it in an account for us, retirement plan. However, the tax code says we don't have to include it or pay federal income taxes on it. So therefore, we may be able to adjust then box one for the 401k plan. However, we may still be subject to Social Security and Medicare on it, and therefore box one might be lower than Social Security and Medicare. We may have similar situations for a cafeteria plan or something like that, and therefore, box one may go down, and it could be applicable to 3 and 5 as well, depending on if they could be decreased. So therefore, so these boxes then could be different when you're thinking about what you're using for federal income taxes. To use this equation for the 1040, the bottom line of the 1040, what you're calculating, typically federal income taxes, not Social Security and Medicare, you're using basically box one. Then you could ask, well, which box actually represents the income that was earned best? And usually that would be box 5, because box 5, Medicare, is going to be the one that's usually the highest because it doesn't have a cap on it. So Social Security has a cap. So if you have a high income earner, it's going to be capped. And these two boxes, if there's something like a 401k plan, will typically be less than box 1. So if you're going to say, how much did you actually earn? Well, box 5 is going to be closest to that. And you may have actually earned more than that if it was something that could be deductible from the Medicare tax. And then what are we actually going to use to calculate the federal income tax? Box 1. Why do we need boxes 3 and 5? Because we're basically double checking typically Social Security and Medicare, which shouldn't have an effect on our tax equation here, but can give that double verification information for the IRS to double check that. All right, so then we have the box 1, the wages, and then the withholdings on those wages will be here. Box 2, Social Security, wages, and then the withholdings, what we actually paid, what was taken out of our check. This doesn't include the employer portion, only the employee portion, what was taken out of our paycheck. And then we have the Medicare and the amount that was taken out. This is the wages, total wages. This is the amount. Then we have the Social Security tips and allocated tips. So if you're in a situation where you have allocated tips, like a waitress or waiter. And then we have the dependent care benefits, which would be on box 10. Box 11, non-qualified plans reported here. So we're thinking about things like health insurance plans. Box 13, we have our retirement plan. So if you have something like a 401k plan, 403b plan, or something like that, you'll see something checked off down here. Now, if you don't see something checked off here on any of the W-2s, then you might think, well, maybe they would qualify or should consider an individual retirement plan. So if you have this checked off, then you would expect something in box 12 that would be some kind of payment into the retirement plan. If you see that this was checked off and nothing is in box 12 recording that they paid money into a retirement plan, and you see no difference between the Social Security wages and the box 1 wages, you might consider, hey, it looks like you have a retirement plan. Why don't you might want to put some money into it, into the retirement plan, because that's a huge benefit typically that can be provided by an employer, because it's a form of compensation that you don't have to include in box 1, which is going to be the calculation of the federal income taxes. Now, you could have information for health care plans down here in box 12 as well. You will typically have letters that will be included with anything that is included down here, and those will coincide with the instructions to this form. So if you have anything that's going to be listed down here or in box 14, you can then go to the instructions in the forms and get more detail on them. Those instructions found on the IRS website. Then we have the state information down below, similar information for the state and the local information. This will, of course, vary depending on the state. If we have state income tax or don't have state income tax, it'll vary based on that. We'll have the ID number. We've got the state wages and the state income tax. Same with the local, if that applies as well. So just a few examples. This is an Excel worksheet that's kind of a mock simulation of the W-2. We will provide this to you. A fairly basic W-2, a straightforward W-2 will have the same numbers you'll see in box 1, 3, and 5 because the total compensation wages is the same as Social Security and Medicare. The federal income tax is something that we cannot tie directly to this number. So you're not going to be able to look at this withholding and say, well, that makes sense because it ties in exactly to there's not a flat tax, right? And it varies on how much someone took out based on what they told their employer to take out based on the tables that are used. So there's no way we can basically verify this number typically with the amount of information we have. It's too difficult to do, but we know that this number applies to the withholding based on this wages number here. Then we have the Social Security, which is more of a flat tax. So we can assume what this is going to be because this is a simplified tax. It's not completely flat. It has a cap on it and whatnot, but it's a much more simple calculation most of the time. You just take the 40,000, and this year it's 0.062, I believe, and that should be the Social Security wages that's how much should be withheld. That's why it's easy to calculate. That's why they already took it out, and it was easy for them to take out, and all we're doing is verifying that, double checking that with the IRS. This one is difficult to calculate, and it depends on a lot of factors, and that's why we're recalculating it on the tax return here, and we'll almost certainly have a refund or tax due, and it will not be exact. And then the Medicare, 40,000 times 0.0145. Again, straightforward tax, already been calculated. This should just be an information form to the IRS to say, hey, yeah, everything looks good. And so that's going to be a straightforward return. W-2, then we might have a W-2 that looks something like this. So now we have a W-2 where the wages are at 150. Again, this will tie out to it in some way based on how many exemptions they put on their W-4. And then the Social Security might be lower. Why is it lower? Because Social Security has a cap on it. So if you have a high income earner, someone who makes over $132,900, then there's going to be a cap, and this one will cap at $132,900, and that is what it is, and that means that the maximum tax will be that $8,240, which is 0.062 or 6.2% of it. The Medicare doesn't have a cap, so now you'll see box 1 and 5 are the same, but box 3 is going to be different. So again, these have flat taxes on them that'll apply out. And the next thing that's a bit confusing, typically on a W-2 return that's fairly common, is you might have all 3 boxes look different, right? And all 3 boxes might look different, for example, because they hit the cap. This one's stuck at the $132,900. It is what it is. This one's at $140,000, and the Medicare now is the highest one. So the Medicare is the highest one. You know this one is at the cap. That's why this one's different. This one then is higher. Why is it higher? Because now we had someone put money into the 401k plan. So the difference between the Medicare and the box 1, Medicare wages in box 1, wages and compensation, is what's in box 12, which is the 10,000, which has a code in this case of DD, which you can then go to the instructions on the back of the W-2, or which you can find on the irs.gov website to say what that code means. It should be a retirement plan. So you say, oh, they put money in your retirement plan. That reduced box 1, how much they're going to pay to the federal income taxes. Box 3 hit the cap at $132,900, and box 5 is at the $150, which is closer to their actual compensation that they actually received. That's what they kind of really earned not given the fact of what the taxes are. So that's just some kind of examples of the types of things that could be in place. Now, when you put this in the tax software, even if you get down to these lower boxes here, the data input field should be fairly straightforward. So you can actually put the data input field, and the input screens should be straightforward. You just then are going to have questions on, well, why? Why is that the case? And you want to basically, the main thing is between these three boxes, kind of consider, why are these all different? They're all wages or compensation boxes. Why are they different? Why am I dealing with Social Security and Medicare? Am I talking about income tax, or am I talking about these other taxes? And those are the questions you want to basically be able to just kind of have in your mind, so that when you're inputting this stuff, it's easier for you to do, easier for you to explain, and hopefully more interesting.